So good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the Real Estate Futureproof event for PRODA's session. My name's David Oates. I'm the Chief Revenue Officer for PRODA. I am absolutely delighted today to be joined by a good friend of both mine and PRODA's, Professor Andrew Baum. For those of you who don't know Andrew, and I'm sure there's not many of you, Andrew is Professor of Practice at the Said Business School at Oxford University. Widely respected in our industry, with a 45-year career. He doesn't look that old. Andrew's authored some widely cited publications, particularly including 2017's PropTech 3.0, The Future of Real Estate, which was updated this year. If you haven't read it and you're a student of the PropTech world or of the property world in general, I would highly recommend it. And Andrew's actually an advisor to PRODA and has been almost since our inception. So Andrew, welcome and thank you for joining me.
It's a pleasure. I'm not at all offended by this, but my name is pronounced Baum, which is sort of...
Oh, sorry.
That's all right. It's just that it demonstrates your classical education that you pronounce it Baum, that you know more than one language. I'm sorry. We're not as well educated as you are, and we've anglicised it to Baum. So
all right. So I'm joined by Andrew Baum. This is a little embarrassing for those of you listening because I've known Andrew for about 18 months now and I've never ever learned to pronounce his surname right. But anyway,
it's not important.
Yeah, unfortunately for Andrew, we're not going to start with Leicester City's destruction of my team, Manchester City, because he's a passionate Leicester fan. But Andrew, I think we can't really avoid starting with the current situation we all find ourselves in globally. But we have seen COVID reconstruct the industries around the world over the last 8-9 months. What impact do you see that it's had, and what impact do you think it will have in the future on the commercial real estate market?
There are, I suppose there are several ways of answering this. I mean, I think what's worth remembering is if we take ourselves back a year, we had a pretty full change agenda already. We were thinking pretty hard about climate change, social impact, low returns in the property market, low interest rates, Brexit. We'd got a whole set of things that were challenging the industry. And, the whole property asset management industry was going through a pretty difficult time, lots of change, lots of challenges. Technology was yet another one of those challenges to real estate managers. The COVID crisis has clearly impacted the office market, the food and beverage market, the retail market, and it's been of positive benefit to probably a few other technology-rich sectors, including logistics, but it's also been of massive benefit, I think, to the technology sector. And it might not feel like it. I think if you're a PropTech startup, you might find it harder than 6 months ago to raise capital. You might think this is a really difficult time that you're going through. But I was on a call last night with a New York conference, and they were convinced that the PropTech adoption had just accelerated rapidly through this COVID crisis, and they could hardly take the smile off their face. They thought this was sort of manna from heaven, that this was just a rapid change. So to answer your question slightly more briefly, I think it's accelerated the need for remote connections between people, which is necessary, which is of course needs technology. Those remote connections are to do with all sorts of things, from customer relations to building data sets to process management. The big open question really is whether we will cease to travel to city centres to use the office. I think that's nonsense, personally. I think that we will go back to pretty much where we were before. If you want to be successful at work, I think you're probably going to have to go back to the city centre office. At the margin, there'll be some changes, and all of those changes will need technology to work it through. So it's a pretty long answer. I think there's going to be quite a lot of disputes, a lot of legal disputes that are going to need to be sorted out between retail landlords and retail tenants. Interesting that Regis threatened to put itself into liquidation this week, and probably in order to break the guarantees on its leases. So there's lots of financial chicanery going on that's going to lead to a lot of legal disputes. And it'll take a couple of years to work all that through. So we're going to go through a period of some change, great opportunities for technology companies, and a real challenge to thinking through the basics of what real estate's all about, I think.
Yeah, I would agree completely. And I think the CEO of Regis, that's probably going to be a stock response from a few people. I completely agree with you. We're in for a real turbulent time. Obviously, I think the days of probably 2 and 3% vacancy rates in the West End are gone for a while. But when we come out of all this, and the one thing I can guarantee, or we can all guarantee about the COVID crisis, is it will come to an end at some point, hopefully not too far in the future. What trends do you see coming out of that after we get through this crisis?
Well, there'll be a tremendous focus on what is a healthy building. I went to my office in Oxford today. In order to get into the building, I needed a building pass. I needed to sanitize my hands. I then had a temperature check. I then had to follow a one-way system around the building. And then I had a perfectly satisfactory day in the office. And I think we'll be entering a period where, the most obvious unicorn for anybody to create, and somebody's definitely working on it now, is going to be a health monitor for every room you want to enter. You and I are going to go to the pub in a year's time, and we're going to be a little bit hesitant because it's going to be heaving with people, and we're going to be wondering how many of them have got some disease that we've never heard of. But eventually there'll be some sort of monitor on the outside of that pub saying this building is clean, the air quality is good, there's nothing that we're worried about. And we're going to have the same thing. We're going to have a wearable on our arms that's going to let us into the building only if we are healthy. So, this sort of health tech is going to be huge, and it's going to be applied to buildings. And that's sort of an obvious thing that's going to go on. Another thing I think is we're going to have to think very hard about how the economics of office buildings work. So, if you imagine that at the margin that we use 10% or 20% less office space because people just choose not to come to work. Now, I'm very skeptical about it, as I said before, but if this happens, then that's going to release some revenue, right? So, the head office of let's say Facebook might save 20% in head office costs because they don't need so much space. So where does that money go? Do people buy bigger houses? Do they travel further to bigger houses? Does that money go into third spaces? So do we see the rise of dedicated chains of workspace in smaller towns, for example? And how does that get financed? Clearly the money is released, but exactly what is the revenue model for this? How do you work in a third space? I really don't think that people are particularly efficient at home. I think where we will likely to settle down is to work in some sort of third space near home, particularly if we're commuting long distances. And I think that introduces the idea of utility tokens and technology. I can see us starting to contribute to the fitting out of a building in our local village, local town, having some sort of ownership of it, and having some sort of discounted rate at which we can go and work in it. And we feel that it's our community facility. So it's a great opportunity for the tokenization of space. So I think they're my two big things at the moment, both to do with the future of work. So one is to do with healthy buildings, and the other one's to do with third places and how we finance, the idea of these small workshops, which people might go to work at on a Monday or a Friday or whatever. Okay.
It's an interesting theory. I mean, it sounds like from what you're saying that for asset managers, for example, the role of data is going to become increasingly critical. How do you see that playing out in the future? Do you think it's got a much bigger role to play as we move forward?
Well, I'd be a bit of an idiot if I didn't say yes to that one, David. I mean, there's, data and analytics is at the center of everything to do with innovation, everything to do with prop tech, everything to do with the real estate industry. Right at the middle of the activity map is data and analytics. It's the big thing. We produced a map of connections. We looked at the 7,000 startups on Unisu, and we scraped their websites, and we made connections between the words that they were using. And right in the middle of the map, it's called a connections map. Right in the middle of this map is big data analytics. That's the center of all of this. So that the easy advice for any property company is start to understand your data, start to visualize your data, understand who owns your data, understand how you protect it, understand how you use it, and understand how you're going to make money out of it, or stop other people stealing it. That's the first thing to do. So digitalization is already creating massive pools of data. You'll hear incredible statistics about, like 50% of the world's data has been created in the last year and a half, for example. The amount of data that's being created every day that can be scraped and accessed is absolutely huge. And yet we have a property industry which still thinks that data is confidential. Data about this private market is confidential. So we're going to go through this period where people are starting to amass huge amounts of data, start to think about how they use it. And that digitalization analysis of data is going to affect two things. It's going to affect the way in which people raise capital, and then it's going to affect the way in which people manage buildings. So the buildings are going to be managed by data collection about the way in which people use buildings, which operate, which meeting rooms are empty, which meeting rooms are full, are they too hot, are they too cold? That's going to be applied to energy efficiency. So all of that data is going to be used to make building management more efficient. And then in terms of decision making, if you want to buy a building, and this sort of goes to the heart of what PRODA's about, if you want data about a building and you want to know whether it's a good acquisition or not, that you're going to be scraping a hell of a lot of data to describe that building. And it's something that current investment processes aren't doing. In 5 years' time, everybody will be doing it. And it'll be led by, you can be absolutely certain that Blackstone and Brookfield are spending huge amounts of money at the moment on data science, data collection, data analysis. And they're not shouting about it very, very much, but you'll find out in 3 or 4 years' time that that's the core of their investment process, and everybody else will suddenly be playing catch up, and everybody will have to have these intelligent data processing systems.
Right. Yeah, and I think, from PRODA's perspective, we're seeing that not just in the big players in the market like Blackstone, but also I think the banks are moving that way in terms of intelligent lending. And I think, I don't know what you think, I'd be interested in your comments, but we're seeing that a lot of the major players are now seeing prop tech as a luxury, as a necessity as opposed to a luxury.
Yeah, no, definitely. Yeah, definitely. Sorry, David, but banks are a good example. If you're lending, maybe your lending is limited to 65% of the value of a building. Mm-hmm. You should be pretty confident that some sort of data-driven process could get you to an accurate idea of the value of a building if you're only lending 65%. So what I'm saying is automation will give you all of the confidence, all of the accuracy you could possibly need to lend. And in addition, lending contracts are easily divisible. So you can tokenize these contracts. You can apply digital technology to splitting the rights and responsibilities. So debt is probably a great place to start. And I agree with you. I think the banks are the places who are going to really innovate this, and then push the sort of slightly more challenging stuff out to the equity side.
Yeah. I mean, I think, and we're straying slightly off where we started from, but you talked at the beginning about COVID being an opportunity for the prop tech companies. And we've definitely seen that I think, and I'd be interested to see if you've seen the same. The digital transformation agenda has gone from being, yes, we should do this, to now we have to do it. It's changed the perception of the world effectively. Yeah,
absolutely. It's a natural corollary of me and you speaking to each other through Zoom or through whatever this technology is. Rather than meeting in a conference hall in Amsterdam somewhere, which we both prefer to be doing, but we can't do it. And in the same way, human beings are not able to get together to optimize their processes. So you have to find other ways of doing it. And that really comes back to data and making sure that you're pulling all of the information you can out of every document you've got. And, the point is that the real estate market is still incredibly analog based, and there's still reliance on paper documents, on PDFs, which are only semi-intelligent, they're digitized, not digitalized. Yeah. And so this process that we have to go through, this process of rebuilding data sets from dead pieces, dead documents, rebuilding everything. in order to create, digital documents, which can then be used to manage information much more efficiently, to control the accuracy of information much more, and then to eventually to transact, which is where we're heading, eventually. Right. The people on this call might not realize how much time is wasted simply retyping tenancy schedules from one Excel spreadsheet into another document, and just the massive waste of human effort that's going on at the moment because the data is simply not digitalized and accuracy checked.
Yeah, I mean, to use a live example, we were talking to a major European bank that have a team equivalent to 33 full-time employees just doing that. And I think one of the biggest barriers, and you've just touched on it, is, the fact that we all thought PDFs were wonderful pieces of paper, but that's all they are, pieces of paper. There's no intelligence. And of course, the minute you start transforming manually, then you not only do you get a time-consuming element, but you've got a possibility of error. So it's interesting. So we've got about 2 or 3 minutes left. I mean, the final question I wanted to ask you, Andrew, and get your opinion on was, and this might sound obvious, but I don't think it is. If you're talking about commercial real estate businesses adopting PropTech, you've either got a challenge or an opportunity. Do you think one outweighs the other, or do you think both apply?
Oh, both definitely apply. I have no doubt about that. There are some companies whose entire business model will be destroyed by technology because they have no customer relationships, for example. If you take some office owners who have no relationships with their customers because they buy a building, maybe in joint venture with an asset management company that's motivated to make as much money as possible out of it, subcontract the property management through service providers. The property managers deal with facilities managers operating for the companies that are occupying the space. The person sitting at the desk may or may not be happy, may not be efficient, may or may not be healthy. And that sort of disconnect between the property owner and the person at the desk, the customer, is going to have to be broken down bit by bit. If you think about hotels, the way hotels work, hotels have got a direct B2C relationship with their customers. They know, they speak to them when they check in. They keep data about what they drink from the minibar and what rooms they use and how often they use those rooms. And that's the sort of the world that we're going to enter. And the COVID crisis has accelerated that world rapidly. So leases are going to get shorter. Flexible space is going to become much more common. And, the really good office manager is going to have a relationship with his customers and know what they want. And that's a way away from the way that most property companies run their property portfolios right now. Right. So that's the challenge. And the opportunity is for those people who understand customer relationships and, how to provide a service, space as a service, the classic phrase. Then, the space as a service is going to reward the people who know how to manage space in a great way.
Right. It's going to be interesting times, I think. We do actually have a question from the audience, Andrew, if you don't mind. Steve Murphy. Good afternoon, Steve. Nice to hear from you.
Well, that's a bloody awful question, David. I can't answer that.
You don't think?
What's the most likely candidate for a digital-only successor to PDF for real estate? I haven't got a clue. I really don't know the answer to that. Steve, can you type the answer to that question in? Because you've really foxed me on that one. Do you know what that means, David?
Unless he's asking us to name a potential PDF. Oh, he's saying
smart contracts. Okay. Right. Yeah. Okay. Well, the transaction. If we talk about the transaction process, there are two issues in the transaction process. So we all would see the possibility of creating digitalized transactions because, if you think about every building having a property passport, all of the data to do with the building being held in digitalized form, and that pack of information being transferred when the building is sold, that is all, of course, technically very possible, particularly for new buildings. But there are two problems with it. The first problem is that the buyer is responsible for taking the risk. So how do you rely on the accuracy of that digital property passport? How do you know that the information in it is accurate and true? And in order to check that, you're going to have to go through the whole due diligence process, which will take a couple of months, just like transactions take. So that's a problem. And the only real solution to that is an insurance contract. So if we were able to, or insurance companies were able to innovate an insurance product which attached itself to the property passport, then I might be prepared to buy a building in a day, having done a virtual tour of the building, having walked past it, and probably going inside it, but I wouldn't need to do a lot of DD on the documentation. I would just take that documentation as read. And that documentation, the title, all of that sort of thing, if that were guaranteed through an insurance contract, then I could transact pretty quickly. And then that would lead to smart contracts. If we then digitalized all the data and we could transact through a smart contract, e-signatures, the lot, then there's no reason why we couldn't have that. So sorry, Steve, I didn't mean to be difficult, but that was very helpful that you nudged me in the right direction.
That's excellent. Are there any more questions from the floor? We are almost out of time.
Well, time flew, didn't it, David? We haven't had enough.
It always does. It always does when I'm talking to you, Andrew. It's always enjoyable.
I did want to talk to you about the analogy about working from home and working in the office. The people who are going to win are the people who are prepared to travel, and the people who are going to lose are the people who stay at home. Just as Manchester City stayed at home and lost, and Leicester City travelled and won.
Do you know what? I was wondering how long it would take you. Thank you very much for getting that in.
It's been a pleasure. You'll notice I'm wearing the colour that Leicester City wore as well. When we worked, you noticed that I'm.
Yes, I did.
My tribute.
I'm not wearing pale blue of any kind, so
no.
But we will be back anyway. Andrew, thank you very much for joining us. It was, as ever, a really enjoyable chat. Thank you to everybody that joined and listened in. And Andrew, I'm sure I'll get to see you in a city somewhere very soon, whether that be London or Oxford.
I do hope so. Cheers, David. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Bye-bye now. Bye-bye.
It's been a pleasure.
Bye-bye. And you.